Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, September 26th, 2020, and today I'm going to be talking about the gender gap in American politics that has pretty much been here for the past couple of elections, where we've seen a very clear distinction between male voters and female voters. Overall, nationwide, Republicans typically win over male voters, whereas Democrats win over women voters. Now, in 2016, Donald Trump did very well with male voters, but Hillary Clinton did okay with female voters. What we see now is that Joe Biden, despite not being the first female presidential nominee in U.S. history, or at least notable nominee, he is still doing better than Hillary Clinton amongst female voters. And as we look in a number of these battleground states, women make up for a very large majority of the electorate. I mean, women vote at a higher rate than men nationwide, and that's been pretty standard for the past couple of decades. Women voters typically drive the election in one way or another. Now, in certain states, obviously, it's lopsided in one way or another, but never too heavily. But what we see now is that Biden is doing very well amongst women voters, and he has also narrowed down the gender gap. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially, in some of these key battleground polls, we have seen Donald Trump's lead either cut in half or drop down significantly from 2016, where he performs amongst male voters. Let's take a look at this New York Times article. I think it's very interesting and very fascinating that somehow Joe Biden is appealing more to women voters than the first female presidential nominee for a major political party in history. So pretty much we've seen three new polls come out from the New York Times Siena College. These are A+ rated pollsters. Very, very good. Iowa, Biden +3. This is a 12-point swing from 2016. Georgia, tie. This is a 5-point swing from 2016. And Texas, Trump +3, a 6-point swing from 2016. So Iowa, while it has seen the largest swing, Joe Biden has to thank women voters for these numbers. Let's talk about where it actually gets into, being men versus women in terms of the gender gap. So what we see now is that Biden leads Trump very well amongst women voters, 14%, whereas Donald Trump leads Joe Biden in terms of male voters by 8%. Now, while this may seem as if it could equal out, there's a reason why Biden takes the overall lead. Roughly, it's 51-49 in favor of women in American politics. Like I said, they do vote at a higher rate than men in 2016, higher turnout amongst registered female voters. But taking a look at the numbers now, you can see why, if we're talking about an equal playing field here, if Biden's up 14% amongst women and then Trump is only up by 8%, it'll equal out to roughly a 3-point lead for Joe Biden. It's a 6-point difference divided by 2. But looking at where, Biden is doing well amongst female voters as well, in Georgia, he's leading by 10%. We're seeing a 21-point difference between where male voters lie and where female voters lie. I think that's very interesting, to say the least. In Texas, looking at Biden's advantage amongst women voters, it isn't enough to overcome Trump's advantage amongst male voters in Texas, but it's still a pretty close state. I mean, it's 38 electoral votes, and it's 46-43. Men prefer President Trump to Joe Biden by 16%. Biden leads women here by 8%. So it isn't enough to bring the state down too significantly, but it's down to roughly, a 3-point margin, 46-43. So in 2016, we were all expecting a very large gender gap. We were expecting Hillary Clinton to win over women voters in numbers that the Democratic Party had not seen, but that just really didn't happen. While she did improve in certain battleground states, such as Arizona and Texas and Georgia, compared to the 2012 margins, it wasn't just white women voters. Actually, it wasn't just women voters in general. It was also white suburban voters, not only women. I mean, these three states moved away from being Republican states because of demographic shifts, and also because Donald Trump was the nominee. And this year, we're seeing the same exact thing. Biden is doing very well in all three of these states compared to even Obama and obviously Hillary Clinton. And it looks like he's on track to carry Arizona, get within a couple of percentages of both Georgia and Texas, despite these states practically being all likely for Trump in 2016, except for Arizona, which was 3.5% in favor of the president 4 years ago. In Georgia, Biden's lead with women matched Hillary Clinton's, but like I said, Biden is also narrowing up the gender gap amongst Georgia male voters. It was a 23-point victory for Donald Trump amongst this demographic group in 2016. Well, now it's cut in half. Biden is only underwater by still double digits, but we're seeing a 11-12% difference from male voters and female voters. Donald Trump is losing male voters, and Joe Biden is expanding his lead amongst women voters. So if we're talking about how this impacts the election, women voters in particular, this is the margin in 2016. Hillary Clinton won female voters by 9%. For male voters, Donald Trump won them by 5% nationwide. But female voters voted for the Democratic Party by 9%. But let's say somehow Biden improves upon this margin by only 1%. I only say 1% because that would be a pretty significant shift on the Electoral College. You can see it adds Michigan in favor of Joe Biden. Let's say 11%. What happens now? Biden wins the election. A 2% increase in terms of support from female voters to from Hillary Clinton to Joe Biden from 2016 to 2020 in favor of the Democrats. 2% wins the Democrats the election. What if you add another percentage? That adds Florida. And then as you get a little bit closer to higher margins, we see Arizona move over. And this is exactly why, Biden is expected to win the election. He's doing way better than improving upon Hillary Clinton's numbers by 2% amongst female voters. And it's not just this voting group. I mean, what we see amongst male voters is that Biden is practically narrowing down Trump's lead to almost half of where it was in 2016. I mean, if we're talking about this moving down to half, let's move this down to Republican plus, 3. This is only a 2% decrease. Biden is able to win the election based off that alone. So imagine that combined with a women's shift in favor of the Democratic Party by larger than 2%. This is just a marginal improvement for Joe Biden where he's dramatically improving. If we're talking, if all of a sudden men vote for Democrats plus 1, and this is assuming that Republicans perform as well as they did in 2016 amongst female voters, male voters land Joe Biden the presidency at 307, but it doesn't even need to be D plus 1. It literally just needs to be R plus 3, and it was R plus 5 just 4 years ago. So the Biden campaign should be at a pretty strong position, but you can see it's a 14-point difference from 2016 in terms of female support and male support for who they are supporting for the election. The Democrats won women voters by 9%. Republicans won male voters by 5%. So very important to note that they vote drastically different. But what we're seeing now is that male voters are moving closer and closer to supporting Joe Biden, whereas female voters have moved even further to the left, to say the least. Obviously, there are some outliers in some of these battleground states, but overall, I mean, the Democratic Party is doing very well, which is exactly why Joe Biden and Donald Trump are practically nowhere near where Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton was only up 3% on Election Day. Right now, Biden is up 7% nationwide. And yes, I am rounding up, but if you use the 538 average, you will actually see, which is a much more accurate average and much more representative of the country itself. While the numbers may vary a little bit, Joe Biden typically is underestimated on Real Clear Politics itself. But even using it, I mean, Biden is up 7% nationwide. And it's not just here. State by state, Biden is doing very well. Women voters handed Joe Biden this lead in the Star Tribune Mason-Dixon poll in Minnesota. They handed him the lead in the state of Maine, in Maine's 2nd district, in Maine's 1st district. And what we're talking about, Democrats altogether, they really all collectively enjoy a lead from women voters, regardless of who they are. It's not just Joe Biden. It's not just because he's running against Donald Trump, but women voters typically split for the Democratic Party. The 2018 midterms were a perfect depiction of that. Women voters went overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party, and there was no presidential ballot. It wasn't just because Donald Trump is on the ballot. It was because women voters typically split for the Democratic Party, whereas men voters typically split for the GOP. But this election is very different. Joe Biden is improving amongst male voters, as we can see in Texas, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Virginia, in Nevada, to a point where now the 538 average would, the 538 forecast would actually give Pennsylvania and Michigan to Joe Biden, and Virginia and Nevada retaining in the Biden column. And now Ohio moved over today, which I think is insane to even think about, that Ohio has moved over into the Democratic column. So all in all, Joe Biden's improvements amongst male voters and female voters have given him a very, very solid look at the election. When we're talking about the key battleground states that were very close 4 years ago, what we saw in 2016 was that these 3 states themselves moved further to the left than the rest of the country. This improvement amongst women and male voters altogether, men and women, across this country is enough to flip these battleground states. It's enough to make Florida and North Carolina super competitive, enough to carry Ohio and Iowa if done correctly. So the Biden campaign is doing a lot of things correctly. They're able to tap into this group of people that a lot of people expected to solidly break for Hillary Clinton that really just didn't. She was only up 9% as the first female presidential candidate for a major political party, presidential nominee for a major political party in history. I mean, it's the first time ever. She would have been the first female president, and now Joe Biden is on track to have the first female vice president. Senator Kamala Harris is on track to be the next vice president of the United States. And this is because Joe Biden, for whatever reason, is able to appeal to these voters a lot better. I think that comes off because he does seem very genuine to the American people. A lot of the comments that he makes aren't necessarily too political. For Donald Trump, while he is running a campaign that we have not seen before and is very unprecedented in many ways, his wow effect is likely to wear off. What we're going to see in the debates coming up is that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are not going to have a live audience. There won't be an immediate reaction to Donald Trump or Joe Biden's comments. So it's just going to be strictly debating. And while some people may think Joe Biden won't do well under pressure, we will see. Because if one thing that we got away from the Democratic primary is that people really don't care about debates. Because Biden didn't win a single one of them until he faced up against Bernie Sanders in a one-on-one, which is exactly why the race didn't change at all after that debate. In fact, Biden won more voters. So overall, all in all, Joe Biden is on track to do very well in the presidency, and he has women voters to thank for that. The gender gap is expanding in terms of women support compared to 2016 male support, but it's narrowing in the sense that male voters are moving closer and closer to the Democratic Party. But overall, that gender gap is still there, and male voters are always going to be, at least for what we see in the foreseeable future, always going to skew to the right, whereas female voters will always skew to the left, which is exactly why, when we're talking about a 50-50 population sample, well, we see a roughly tied election. But at this point, there's a reason why Biden's up 6-7% nationally. It's because of those reasons that I listed. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord link for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2020 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all tomorrow.